A long time ago in the distant year of 2021, how simple things were back then, I made a video discussing the confusing lore of Sonic the Hedgehog, mainly pointing out how inconsistent it had been with Sonic Team continuously flip-flopping on whether or not certain elements would carry over between games, such as Blaze being from the future or an alternate dimension, or if guns still existed, or even the mere concept of currency. It seems to have come from a habit of not being able to stick to their guns and continue evolving on story elements, instead constantly scrapping stuff in favor of going in the complete opposite direction. Something worth noting, however, is that Sonic Team have actually taken major strides in correcting this issue since then, even if it is the most oversized band-aid fix ever. You were worried that there was no consistent lore in Sonic the Hedgehog? Well fine, we'll hire a lore manager. Classic Sonic being from another dimension makes no sense and is super lame? Okay, well make him Sonic from the past again, sure. Concerned that the games are entirely disparate from each other with no recurring moments? Well screw it! Everything is canon now. Happy? Jokes aside, I would much rather take this over how things were in the late 2010s. Naturally, we're now approaching the issue of when they say everything is canon, it creates a lot of confusing contradictions, but it's to be expected at this point. What else could they do? All you can hope is that moving forward they make more of an effort to streamline things, so you aren't doing all this narratively different stuff with the series while still acting as if it all connects in some way. Like Sonic Prime is canon, fat fucking chance. But at least for now, we can rest easy knowing that Sega's been taking major strides in ensuring the franchise isn't all over the place anymore. Story-wise, that is. Because in the gameplay department, we're still at square one. It's gotten worse since the release of Frontiers, if anything. Before we begin, this video is more for fun than anything, to point out the major inconsistencies with Sonic gameplay. You know, me mentioning what a certain game doesn't do compared to others is not a reflection of my overall opinion on it. This is a topic I find more so interesting because, well, I can't think of another gaming franchise on the level of Sonic the Hedgehog that suffers this same problem. I'll show you what I mean by this. Let's just say you, viewer, were put in charge of the next mainline 3D Mario game. What can he do? Well, naturally I'd have to assume he's gonna have a set running speed, a single jump along with a crouch, a long jump, a backwards jump, a wall jump, you get the picture. At most, a Mario game will find a needless move like 64's kick and throw it to the wayside, and never to be seen again. Or they'll actually do something controversial like removing the long jump from Sunshine, in which they immediately got the picture and brought it back as a permanent addition to his mainline moveset. Instead, the major changes in his abilities come from that entry's main gimmick. Flood in Sunshine, the spinning galaxy, Odyssey has Cappy. Similarly, if you're making a new Crash game, what's he gonna do? Jump, slide, and spin. Recently, he's been given a permanent double jump, which seems like it'll be here to stay. But now, let's say you're put in charge of the next Sonic game. Sonic Frontiers 2, the Frontierning. What's Sonic gonna do? How fast is his base run? Does he have a boost or a spin dash or both? Can he wall jump, double jump, a drift? When you think about it, Sonic has no base moveset, and I find that utterly bizarre because you think when it comes to a franchise with a long 30-year history, they'd have figured that out by now. But no, Sonic's gameplay continues to fluctuate between entries on a seemingly random basis. Just when you can start to see a natural evolution in the games building on each other, suddenly they throw you for a curveball and introduce an entirely new game feel. And so that's what I wanted to talk about today. I wanted to go over a ton of different aspects of Sonic that you oftentimes see changing between games. Not for any desire to try and find the perfect Sonic moveset or anything, but just for fun. It's interesting to try and figure out what Sonic Team's mindsets could have possibly been when deciding to get rid of or add certain abilities to these games. Case in point, what is Sonic's most famous ability? You know, the spin dash, obviously, goes without saying. Now, isn't it wacky as hell to consider that this move, which is so intrinsically associated with the character, has only appeared in 2 modern Sonic movesets in the past 18 years? Like, what? From the beginning, from almost the beginning, the spin dash was seen as Sonic's defining trait, working brilliantly as a way to build up speed without having to use the terrain to your advantage. You press down, then you mash the jump button, easy as. This has obvious benefits in the 2D entries where momentum-based platforming was the name of the game. However, upon the series' jump to 3D, it appears that Sonic Team began to struggle to make this a move you would actually want to perform. Things started fine with Adventure, where the move was so busted that it was seen as incredibly useful for massive level skips, launching you way up into the sky if you're doing it off an incline. With each subsequent entry, though, it appeared that to try and mitigate this issue, you know, being able to break the stage in half, they opted to make the spin dash weaker. In Shadow, you had to completely stop on a dime before performing it, or else you just do a lame slide that ironically only makes you slower. And in 06, we saw it reach its breaking point where you had to be standing as still as physically possible, in which the controls are already so sensitive that the last thing you would ever want to do in this game is be faster. And I think with this, Sega realized something needed to change. Sonic's classic abilities weren't translating into 3D nearly as naturally as they'd hoped. And so with Unleashed, we saw them make the controversial choice of removing the spin dash altogether. I mean, why would you ever need to do it now that you have this newfangled boost? Which not only also kills enemies, not only makes you go way faster, but also can be activated immediately with the press of a button. No build-up. Not gonna argue about which is better for Sonic to have, but it appears that the praise given to Unleashed's modern Sonic segments gave Sonic Team the confidence in making this boost a permanent addition to his moveset. Sorry, Spin Dash, I don't want to play with you anymore. Until Lost World, that is. In which Sonic Team for some reason decided, fuck the boost, actually. We're bringing back the Spin Dash. And also, we're gonna make it work completely differently to how it was previously, okay. Lost World's less than stellar reviews convinced them to immediately backtrack and once again bring back the boost, although not even it remained without change. In Forces Onwards, instead of simply being flung straight forward while performing an air boost, you instead get sent upwards at a slight arc, which we then saw make a return in Frontiers, along with the Spin Dash. I suppose with the boost being made much weaker in that game, almost working like a glorified run button, fans figured this would have been the perfect opportunity to finally try and balance this move while still keeping in the Spin Dash. And so in the game's second major update, we saw them take a crack at it, to mixed results. It's cool and fun to use and all, but we've not come back to that adventure problem of being able to completely break these massive maps they've designed. Even worse so. It's why I don't necessarily mind it being locked away behind all the action chain challenges. At least then you have to play through the game in its intended way before being given what's basically God mode. I hope whatever game comes next ditches the boost altogether in favor of trying to finally make a momentum-based spin dash with proper rolling physics work in 3D. I'd rather one really fun move than two decent ones that pretty much do the same thing. I also hope Sonic Team doesn't learn the wrong lessons from the praise given to the Spin Dash here. The last thing I would want is a 3D Sonic game where the level is nothing more than set dressing for you to try and fly over. Speaking of, fly, Sonic Heroes has a fly type. Brilliant. Heroes' unique team-based gameplay resulted in characters being given a ton of moves that were never seen again. This was actually the first mainline game to get rid of the Spin Dash, replacing it with the much less useful Rocket Excel, where you have to hold in the action button and wait for all your characters to line up before letting go as your partners whack you forward for a short burst of speed. It's one of those moves where it's only really useful if you know how to take advantage of it, because you can travel some far-ass distances if you know when to activate it. Sonic also has the long-forgotten tornado attack, which sees him spin around so fast that it causes a tornado to form, blowing whatever enemies get caught inside way up in the air. This was mainly for opening up weak spots, and given Hero's larger focus on combat, it's no surprise why this move wasn't carried over in any major way in the future. Possibly the most recent addition given to Sonic's core moveset has been the double jump, which was first introduced in Lost World and has since become a staple. It's interesting, the double jump for Sonic is actually an idea that I really hate in concept. You know, it makes Sonic seem way less athletic and cool when he has to do an unnatural second jump in midair that halts all your momentum at times. But in execution, well, I mean, it's a double jump, of course it's useful. And it's for that reason I'm happy to see that it's probably going to continue being added to these games in the future. Although something I hope they bring back is that fun little flip animation that was only in Lost World. Sonic definitely needs to show more of his acrobatics in these games, like the wall run. Why are they so selective about when it can be done? In Lost World, a major part of the marketing revolved around Sonic's new parkour abilities, like wall running. Whereas in Sonic Adventure, well, that was just something you could do naturally, no fanfare. It returned in Adventure 2, 06, Unleashed Colors and Generations decided to give this moment more spectacle with designated segments where you have to dodge shit. Yet when Lost World was coming out, I was still like, wow, Sonic can wall run now, that rocks! Only to play the game and realize there are maybe 5 or 6 moments in the entire thing where it's actually useful. Something I'm starting to realize is that this topic is a lot more complicated than simply discussing the different moves Sonic has between games, but also how these moves work on their own between games. The boost, for example, I talked earlier for a bit about them constantly changing the speed, aura, air boost trajectory, but it seems as if Sega can't even decide on how Sonic obtains this ability. The boost is executed through this gauge in the bottom left corner. No boost? Can't do it. And so how do you refill up this meter, I hear you ask? Well, it depends. In Sonic Unleashed it was through collecting rings which gradually filled it up. However, that in and of itself was only in the HD version. In the Wii and PS2 port, the boost was instead separated into different segments, with you getting a short burst of speed every time it's executed. Basically a counter of how many times you could do it, which could then be refilled through rings once again. Or alternatively, by performing an action chain, which I'm fairly certain was exclusive to that version. This immediately shifted in the next release, Sonic Colors. Obviously, being the game to introduce the Wisps, they had the genius idea to have one of these aliens be Sonic's method of filling up the boost gauge. And so you have to seek out the White Wisp capsule, which would give you a large chunk of boost. Then, again, in the next release, Generations, we saw them go back to Unleashed's method of collecting rings. Although now you can also fill up your meter here by defeating enemies, which is useful. But then, in the follow-up Sonic Forces, we're back to the fucking Wisp capsules. Why are they even here? Now in Frontiers, the boost is just filled naturally over time, which I think may be the best way to go about it. You know, just ignore all these other fucking factors once and for all, so we're not flip-flopping between every other game, going back and forward and back and forward. Like the wall jump, you know, he either has it or he doesn't. In Heroes, you had the triangle jump, which let you attach yourself onto a wall, in which pressing the jump button shoots you to the other side. In Shadow, they expanded upon this by letting you run across the wall for a bit before jumping. 8 years before Lost World apparently invented the fucking idea. Then Unleashed brought wall jumping back, but vertically this time, which was useful as it was the first 3D Sonic game to incorporate 2D segments. I really liked it in Unleashed in Colors as they let you do it against any flat wall you could find. However, as a way to, I guess, cut down on the amount of moves you can do at once, Generations decided they would have these awkward context-sensitive walls that would automatically put you in the wall jump mode. It works here because Generations is so tightly designed, but it does make things feel a tad less freeing if that makes any sense. And from there, wall jumping has been all but abandoned. In Forces, Sonic has a wall jump programmed into his moveset, but there's never a single moment in the game where you find yourself using it. And in Frontiers, you now find yourself having to run up these weird shiny green platforms, which you can jump off in a similar fashion to Lost World. Which, hey, I guess is better than nothing. I can't say the same about that poor drift. The drift rocks. It fits Sonic so well. And again, either he has it or he doesn't. They gotta fucking decide because it's gotten absolutely ludicrous in recent games. Has it in Unleashed, became context sensitive in Colors to make up for the lack of buttons on the Wii Remote. Generations brought it back in full swing paired with a tighter turn and cooler animation. And then, it just vanished. In Forces, your avatar will occasionally latch himself onto a wall and use it to turn around a tight corner, all you getting to do is force yourself left and right. And in Frontiers, they, for some reason, removed the drift entirely, aside from in one single cyberspace level, in which specific dash panels put you into a drift mode, where you awkwardly move left and right like you're running on butter. I mean, why even bother? Even more confusing, in the game's third update, you can unlock a boost for Amy Rose that lets her ride atop a hammer while a deck of tarot cards are used to make a makeshift whale somehow. And even weirder, this is the only time in the game where you have a permanent drift. And it controls just fine. I would like to have this as Sonic. Speaking of Amy, did you know that in Sonic Heroes, she's the only character to keep the classic Sonic jump sound effect? I think that's neat. I mean, they can't even decide in the fundamentals like, I don't know, how many rings do you lose after getting hit? For like 15 years it was all of them, you know, no duh. But then in Shadow the Hedgehog, they decided to make it so you only lose 20 rings. I guess because of that game's larger focus on exploration, it would be annoying to constantly seek out rings after being hit. Especially after they became more scarce during backtracking. I like in Sonic 06 how the tiny machine gun bullets only shave off a single ring. That was a fun idea. But then, in Unleashed, it's back to losing just a certain chunk. Although this time it's varied. I'm pretty sure you lose half your rings if it's over a specific number, which is a decent system, I suppose. But with Frontiers' open zone gameplay having a much larger focus put on combat against massive enemies that take longer than a couple homing attacks to defeat, as well as lives being pretty much non-existent now, it makes sense why they'd now treat the ring system as more of a health bar, with each enemy causing you to lose a different amount and you being able to upgrade your stats to hold up to 999 at a time. This is probably what they're going to stick with going forward, even if it is radically different to how things were before. But I just honestly hope they continue to evolve on this system for now instead of having the next game revert back to one of the others. Shadow Generations gets a pass. I'm not sure if anyone else has brought it up, but I recall in Sonic Forces when the game was coming out, I noticed in pre-release footage, especially in the E3 stuff, that Sonic or the Avatar wouldn't have the option of picking up lost rings. There was even an animation for it in the top left, which I'm not sure if it remained in the final. It's kinda hard to lose rings in Sonic Forces, so I barely noticed. I bring this up because I recall the Hedgehog's avatar ability in the final game is to keep some rings after being hit. But originally, I remember this being the only species that would allow you to pick them back up after being attacked. I assume people at E3 weren't fans of this deviation, as it kinda makes the process of collecting any more than a single ring completely pointless. Again, how do you feel to misunderstand one of your main gameplay features that badly? Either way, they got the message and reverted it back for the final game. The whiplash I saw when I went to look for gameplay footage of this, scrolled down to the comments, and witnessed me saying the exact same thing 7 years ago. Some things never change, I guess. Again, it's all weird evolutions followed by backtracking, with no foresight as to how this would all look when taking a step back and seeing the franchise as a whole. No double jump in Unleashed, Colors has one, Generations doesn't, and then he does again. It's not like they're removing or adding moves and sticking to it, they're constantly going back and forth. And I think this only reached a crescendo after Generations, because more often than not these decisions seem to be brought on by one thing and one thing only: nostalgia. No need to beat a dead horse, as everyone is already aware of the series' devolution, having many elements returned from past games, seemingly for the sake of triggering the dopamine of reminding a general audience about the most famous elements of the series. You know, a moto bug is a lot more iconic than the Egg Fighters. So right now we're seeing the nostalgia argument come back. However, not in regards to the classic series anymore. Instead, it's with the release of Shadow Generations and it deciding to bring back many forgotten locations and characters from the 2000 entries. Now we're seeing some folks, only a few admittedly, point out the hypocrisy in hating nostalgia pandering with the classic stuff, but then giving it a pass when it's from the early 3D games. And I only bring it up because I actually disagree with this sentiment entirely. The reason the classic elements in Lost World Forces and Frontiers get such negative reactions is because not only have we seen them repeated for the past decade and a half, it loses that impact after a while, but also because they never really attempted to do anything new with them. It was simply that thing we had seen before, please clap. It was a jarring shift backwards from where the series had been headed throughout its entire 3D journey. Comparatively, bringing back and expanding more on 2000s elements is a lot more forgiving to me because, at least in the way they've been handling it so far, it instead feels like the series getting back on track. The change to more kid-friendly writing and stories after Unleashed was so awkward and unfitting, especially of where the series was heading at that point, that now it more so feels as if the franchise has become aware of this field's decade-long experiment, and is aiming to return to where it was previously heading. Obviously, I'm hoping this can be done in ways that aren't so blatant. Again, Frontiers kinda goes too far in that pandering area for my liking. But at the very least with the modern stuff, there's room to expand. The classic series now being inserted back into the timeline means they're restricted to future games in that sector being simple Sonic vs. Eggman ROMs, reusing the same batch of characters without much room to do anything new. There are later modern 2D games that really do a great job at evolving the classic formula, like Sonic Advance 3 in my opinion. Yet we can't see that expanded upon anymore because it's not a classic, he didn't have black eyes, so whoops! However, with Modern, there's nowhere to go but forward. Shadow Generations giving us more insight on his character and allowing us to finally see events we were only ever told about, such as Gerald's field research experiments on the Gizoids. They're, at least not in any major way in what we've seen so far, no longer picking and choosing which parts of the franchise are canon based on general game reception, and instead deciding to embrace the entire history of Sonic's world. And it's because of that I don't find this pandering that egregious. Again, it simply feels like the series is finally getting back on track. Now, if we can only stick to the visual evolution of the franchise too. Why do we need these classic springs in the modern games? Why does that happen now? In Generations, they pretty clearly kept the old springs in the old levels, and the new springs in the new levels. The only time modern Sonic could interact with a classic spring was when approaching the Time Eater segment at the end of the game, where the combining of these two styles was purposeful. Yet for some reason, I assume out of just having the model laying around, we now see these yellow springs scattered around the open zones and Frontiers. Which is only really weird to me because the new designs were specifically added to make them easier to interact with in the third dimension. The star pattern helped you see what direction they would shoot you in as well. Yet for nostalgia reasons, I suppose we gotta bring back the old ones. How come this never works in reverse? Imagine if in Sonic Superstars we saw a modern spring. They would never do that because it would come off as weird and jarring. I don't know why it doesn't work the other way around. Cyberspace has it the worst, modern Sonic interacting with all these classic elements like the tunnel segments from the classic games and Generations. It's honestly just strange. Colors in Generations brings back the moto bugs that look like this. Sonic 4 makes them look like this. Lost World makes them fucking look like this. And now in Frontiers we're back to this. Why? Not like I'm losing sleep over this or anything. Again, it's not to point out that any of this is inherently bad on its own, just inconsistent. which hey, I guess is the word most often associated with the franchise, so I guess that fits. I don't really know where to go from here or how to conclude this, other than saying I hope this is an issue that's addressed in future entries. Because it's what results in just about every Sonic game feeling so drastically different visually and mechanically. And it only aids in that confusion shown where folks can't agree on what a Sonic game should be. My dream Sonic moveset? Double jump with the flip animation, roll, spin dash, homing attack, drift, along with whatever game-specific abilities they have that time around, like the Psy Loop or the Wisps. Doesn't really need to be that complicated. Thanks for watching!